There are quite a few words that I could say right now on camera, standing here in this church, that would come across as almost an insult to you. Or if you hear them, if I were to say them, you would almost feel angry. A lot of those words are 4-letter words, but don't worry, I'm not going to give you a list. I'm not going to list all those words out, but we are going to talk about 2 words today. One that starts with an F, one that starts with a D, that we are really not pleased when we hear, and we have to talk about these things. The first one coming at you is the F word, fault. We don't like that word, fault, especially when we are the ones at fault for something that has happened. The other word that we're going to be talking about is the D word, discipline. That word really we don't like to hear when we are the ones at fault, and the solution to whatever we have caused is discipline. It's not always easy to kind of move into that area of discipline in our lives. But I want to make a promise to you. I want you to really lean in today. And if we listen to what God is trying to tell us and teach us today, we're not going to experience the guilt that is associated with faults that we have in our lives. Instead, we'll be able to experience the freedom that comes with discipline. So why don't we jump on in here and join Jeremy for part 2 of our series, Breathing Room.
I'm glad that you're here for part 2 of the series that we've called Breathing Room. Now, if you weren't here last week, we talked about this, how important it is that there are times in our life when maybe your closet or your back seat or your trunk looks like this. And it's okay if your closet or your trunk or your back seat looks like this, but it's not okay for our life to look like this. Life is not better when we've got everything crammed in our time, everything crammed in our money, and there's no room in our relationships, our time, or our money for any kind of error or problem because we don't have any breathing room. Life is just better when we have a little bit of breathing room. And so we use this definition to talk about what breathing room is. Breathing room is the space between our current pace and the limits. We all have limits, and it's just a reality of who we are. And so we talked about last week about how important and how much better life is with breathing room in it. And we're talking, I told you this is a 4-week series. We're going to push in and we're going to talk about these things. Today, we're going to talk about a dreaded subject in church. We're going to talk about money. Money is not an easy subject at church because usually you think of a preacher standing up here and a person sitting out there, and you're thinking about the idea that I might ask for money of you, but I want you to know something. I don't want a single thing from you. We're not launching a building campaign. We're not talking about an offering. We're not even asking you for anything. In fact, I don't want anything at all from you. What I want is something for you. This idea of breathing room is critical. And here's the deal. If you're here today and this idea of Jesus, God, church, faith, all this stuff is not your deal, you're not sure you believe any of it, or you might believe part of it, but you're not sure about all of it. And I want you to know something. This is one of those things. It's not a God thing. It's not a Jesus thing. It's not a church thing. It's just a thing. And that's what we talked about is important part of this, is that you can learn something from this. You can take something away from this, and I promise you it can change your life if you take it and walk out of here with it. But you don't have to believe the things that we believe to make sense out of this stuff. Now, but if you are a follower of Jesus, If you're here today and you're a Christian, you want to make Jesus the Lord of your life, I got to be honest with you. This isn't just something you can maybe take or leave. This is critical, because I'll promise you, you cannot continue to follow Jesus as a part of your life, make him Lord and master of your life, and if without getting this whole thing straight. So this is important stuff, and I don't want you to miss a single bit of it. Now here's the deal. This is where we start, and probably the most important thing that I'll say today is going to come up on this next screen, and I want you to look at it. It's this truth, that standard of living is not equal to quality of life. Now we have a tendency in our world to get that kind of really confused, right? We think that our quality of life will go up if our standard of living would go up. We would have a better life if we have a bigger house. We would have a better life if we had nicer cars. We'd have better life if we had these things and that stuff. But I want you to know something. Your standard of living is not equal to the quality of life that you have. Now listen, every advertisement that you've ever seen tells you something different, doesn't it? Every time you've walked into a store and you've seen the stand up about how if you bought this kind of food, if you ate the organic stuff, if you did this thing, you're going to be healthier, right? You've walked into car dealers and they've told you and made you feel like if you buy this car or have this size of car, then you'd have a better life. And you've talked to a realtor who cast the idea of having this kind of countertop and that kind of space in your room and this kind of garage, then you would have a better quality of life. Now listen, nothing against retail people, nothing against salespeople, nothing against car dealers, nothing against realtors. I love them. They're an important part of who we are. But their job is to convince you that you would have a higher standard of living would be equal to a better quality of life. But we all know that this is not true. It's not true. It's just something we intuitively know, and it's an absolute in our life. But we constantly get this confused. And when we think that if we raised our standard of living, it would increase our quality of life, we wind up with this. Next week, we're going to talk about time and how time is limited. So you have to limit what you can do with your time. But money is not the same, because while money is limited in some ways, right? You feel like that's the case. Money is limited, but you don't have to limit what you can do with your money. Because why? Because if we want to raise the standard of your living, you can't borrow time, but guess what you can do? You can borrow money. And it's easy to borrow money, and you can just borrow it, then pay it back later and work it out. But then we can keep borrowing and keep spending our way into this kind of setting. And this is where a lot of us are living, where we don't have any free space, any breathing room in our financial life. And I want you to know something, that if you are here today and this whole faith, Jesus, God, church thing is arm's length and you don't believe it, this could just be a good motivational talk that'll help you kind of figure out some of your financial life. You can take it. It's free. We don't want anything from you. But if you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus, and this idea of making Jesus Lord of your life is something that you want to be a part of, then I got to be honest with you. If we don't get this part of our life right, that part of our life will never happen. Now, I want you to get this principle that this is important, and if you hear nothing else, right? If you lose electricity and you walk away, you're finished with this. Standard of living is not the same as quality of life, and you need to walk away with that. So do I. I need to internalize that. And I need to understand this piece of it too, that creating breathing room financially may lower your standard of living, but it will raise your quality of life. This sounds un-American, doesn't it? It doesn't even sound like something an American would say, that I would choose to create some space and lower my standard of living, but in the process, raise my quality of life. Listen, I know that this rubs against who we are, but it's true. And so we have to kind of like lean into it, at least ask this question. Let me tell you something I know about you, because it's something that I know about me. So I'll just say them like they're all about you, but the truth is they're just as much about me. Every one of these things are true in my life. They're true about me, and I want you to hear them. This first one is that you are living on a percentage of your income. You are. You're currently living on a percentage of your income. Most of us don't know what that is. Most of us don't know if it's 90% or 95% or 113%. But you are currently living on a percentage of your income. And my guess is that you have said this at some point in your life, if not right now. If I had just a little bit more money, I'd be fine, right? You've said it. We're currently living on some percentage of our income. We may or may not know what it is. And at some point in the story, you've said, if I had just a little bit more, if I just made $1,000 more or $5,000 more or $10,000 more, or if I had health insurance or benefits, then if I just had just a tiny bit more, I'd be okay. And here's the third thing that's true about you, it's true about me, and it's really simple. It's this. You felt the same way when you made a lot less money. I remember when Sheila and I were very young, and we just said, if we just had just a couple of $1,000s more, we'd be fine. But you know what? We got a couple $1,000s more, and things weren't just fine, right? And if we just could get enough to do this, we'd be fine. We'd be golden, right? If we just made $10,000 more, and then you made $10,000 more, what'd you do? You spent $10,000 more. And what'd you need? Just a little bit more. Whatever it was not enough. And you felt the same way when you made a lot less money. And here's what I want you to know. This is the bottom line of that observation about our lives, is that your situation won't change if you make big money, but it will change if you make big changes. It will significantly change if you choose to make different changes, because here's the thing. If you go from making $55,000 a year to $60,000 a year, you won't be just fine. Because what will happen if you don't make big changes is you'll spend a few $1,000s more, and you won't create breathing room. You won't be fine. You won't wind up in a better place that's more relaxing. You'll spend and borrow your way into oblivion. Big changes will make much more difference, much bigger difference than big bucks. Because when we live like this with no breathing room, we can't even enjoy the things that we have. And so we wind up spending and hurting ourselves. And to illustrate that, I want to kind of put something up. We're going to walk through this slowly. Here's a chart. This part of it is money, and this part of it is time. Now, you don't have to understand every bit of it. You don't have to understand all the details of it, but here's how your money goes. This is how much money you make as income, and this is the amount of time you've spent making that money. And at some point in your life, this is going to happen, right? You're going to have income that you hope goes up over time. So, some of you are going, man, that is quite a steep curve. My life has never gone like that. Well, these don't have to be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. These might be hundreds of dollars of increases. But my hope is that at some point in your life, you have an income. And my second hope is that over time, the amount of time you spend working at that job, doing that career, doing the things that you do, that over time, your income increases. Now, that's really not a specific amount. Your income might go up a ton one year and flatline and go down some. And some of your income may go like up, beep, like it's just dead in the water and specifically stagnant. It doesn't matter. It's just an illustration. So understand that there is that point of your life where income is going to go up a little bit. Now, here's what we want to talk about. This is our spending, our expenses that we're thinking. That's what we want to do, is we want to keep our spending below our income. And if we choose to do this, right, this is a thing that we call breathing room. Now, I know that every one of you, whether you believe in God, Jesus, church, the faith, the whole thing, or not, whether this is a big deal to you or no deal to you, every one of us wants this, right? Rich or poor, we want this, right? Red, yellow, black, and white, we want this. Single, married, have kids, don't have kids, had kids and they moved out, had kids, they moved out and moved back in. It doesn't matter. Everybody wants this all the time, because the truth is, when we spend less money than we make, we have breathing room. And you know what happens when we have breathing room? We get along better. We drive slower. When we have breathing room in our finances, you can slow down. You can choose to do things and not feel guilt and pressure. You know that when you have breathing room, you can stop and pray and concentrate. And it makes it a whole lot easier to take those do not worry about the things that you eat and what you wear and what you drink. when Jesus talks, it makes it easier to be faithful because there's breathing room. But unfortunately, this is what our picture looks like, right? Our income and our spending track with each other. The more money we make, guess what to do? The more money we spend. And the more money we make, the more money we spend. And we wind up living life with an unbelievable amount of pressure. And you know what happens here? Instead of getting along, all the tensions in our marriages rise. Instead of driving slower, we have to drive faster because we've got to get to places and get something done and make dollars, because if we don't, we're in trouble, right? And you think that the stress is bad when things are tight. When things are like this, it's really bad. Because what happens? You're just terrified that you're going to lose some of this income, and your spending, your quality of life has not really tracked up, but your standard of living is following along. You've committed to these things. And what would happen if you lost your job? What would happen if your income took a hiccup? What would happen if a worldwide pandemic set in and you had to stay home and you didn't get paid for a minute? What would happen if the government didn't bail you out? What would happen if, right? And can I be honest with you? There's a part of us that goes, man, if we had just a little bit more, we'd be okay, right? But here's the problem. Let me point this out. If you make $55,000 a year, $60,000 a year, $65,000 a year, and you lose your job, you know what the reality is? It's easier to replace a $50 or $55 or $60,000 a year job than it is to replace one where you make more money. If you think that making more money would make it less stressful, it won't. Because when you make $150 or $200 or $250 or $300,000 a year, do you know how difficult it is to replace that job? So you live in constant terror that if I make $150 or $200,000 a year, and if I lost that income, I've got a lifestyle that lives right alongside of it. The pressure just mounts. Now the real marriage problems come in. Now the real ulcers begin to work out. You see what I'm saying? When our spending tracks with our income, we have a dire problem on our hands. It's a reality. And then there's this one. Uh-oh. What about when our spending exceeds our income? When we've realized that we don't have to limit what we do with our money, we can just borrow more. Right? And maybe this upside down came because you chose to borrow or spend your way into oblivion. But maybe it came because all of a sudden you had an income change and your income dropped below your spending. And now you're spending more money than you make. And there's no real end in sight. Let's go back to this one for a minute, because this is where the spiritual stuff really starts to happen. Is that you and I have to work at changing this, don't we? I mean, I don't know about you, but when we're spending alongside of our income and there's no breathing room, there's no room for error, there's no room for changes, or when you're spending more than you take in, it's almost impossible to feel at peace, isn't it? I don't know about you, but when I lived like that, I never felt like I had a handle on life. I never felt like there was hope. I want you to know something. Something's got to change in your life. Something's got to change in our lives where we create some space and some breathing room. Because here's the deal. If you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're not a Christian, if you're not, this whole faith in God and church thing is not important to you, I want you to know something. This is really valuable for you, for peace. And this is a good, motivational, informational talk for you. And maybe you can just take this and walk away with it and put it in your life. And I promise it'll make your life better. But if you're a follower of Jesus, this doesn't just have to change because of how we feel about stuff. This has to change because we cannot effectively and really follow Jesus and make him Lord of our life unless we get this right, because this is constantly telling us that we can and can't do. This is what happens here, right? When we begin to make this spending is like tracking with our income, you know who runs our life? All things financial do. All things financial run our life. MasterCard or Visa or our mortgage or our car payment tells us what we can and can't do. When we have a little breathing room, you know what we can do? We can say, hey, you know what? I want to go on this vacation. It'll be okay because we've got a little breathing room. I think we can send the kids to college because we've got a little bit of breathing room. I think we can choose to be generous and be kind to those people who need us right now. Like, we can do that because we have a little bit of breathing room. But when we live like this, guess what we can't do? Man, I want to go on that vacation. MasterCard says I can't do it. I want to send the kids to this kind of school. Man, the mortgage company says we can't do it. I would love to be able to care about what's going on in my community. Can't do it. Because we can't do it because all the financial pressures say that we can or can't do things. We live at odds with the reality of who we have chosen to become, the spending in our life. So here's the struggle. We can't really do what Jesus says to do. And here's the most amazing part about it. Jesus predicted this 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, he was having a conversation, telling a story. We call them parables. And he told this story about this rich young ruler, this rich man, this business owner who was going to let go of a guy. And the guy who he's going to get let go of, he got kind of word of it, and he decided to organize his options and put himself in a place where he could still have a way of making income. So he started juggling some stuff around. And when it came time for him to lose those things, he kind of wraps up the story, Jesus does, with this verse, this statement. He says, no one can serve two masters. My guess is that you've had a point in your life where you've had two masters, right? You've had a boss that's in the office and one that's kind of a regional person. And there's that tension between what happens on the ground in real time and people who do this work know, and what the regional guy maybe thinks should happen. Or maybe you grew up and you were like, I like hanging out with my dad because my dad lets me stay up late. But when I'm with my mom, she makes me go to bed earlier. So I have two masters who kind of compete. What Jesus says here is masterful. It's unbelievable. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You'll lean toward one of them. When those two masters, when those two entities are at tug of war, you're going to lean toward one and away from the other. It's part of how that works because they are at odds for each other. What's crazy about it is what Jesus says next is this relevant 2,000-year-old comment that might honestly be more relevant today than it was then. Look at what he says. You cannot serve God and money. Well, don't you mean the devil? Can't serve God and the devil? No, that's not what he says. He doesn't say you can't serve God and the devil. He says you can't serve God and money. Because the truth is, when we want to serve one, when MasterCard or Visa or our car payment or our mortgage company or whatever is at odds, when they're calling the shots, you can't go here, you can't do that, you can't give that. You can't serve God and money. When our lives are spending, where our spending is tracking along with our income, you know what happens? Is that we get stuck in a place where we can't one another. What does one another mean? I mean, all throughout the New Testament, if you read it over and over again, it says we should do this. We should be compassionate to one another. We should be kind to one another. We should love one another. We should bear one another's burdens. And you know what you can't do when MasterCard and the car payment and our mortgage payment are running our life? When we don't have any breathing room, we can't one another very well. We can't care for the people in our life and help them out. We can't serve both God and money. So here's the thing that we're stuck with, right? We're trying to figure this out. What do we do? So I want to give you some steps, right? I know that steps don't always work and not everybody lives by steps, but you're very, very intelligent people. I would say that if you attend Journey Church, that you're an above average intelligent person. So really all you have to do is the first one. You have to very much get to a point in your life where you say, I decide. That's the most important step. The most important step is the first one. It's easier to keep doing what you're already doing, and we call it spiritual inertia around here. We've said that a number of times. Once you decide to do something, now you've got something to follow up with, but you have to decide. You have to get so sick of living that kind of life. You have to get so sick of income tracking with spending. You have to get so sick of living life like this that you decide, I'm going to make some breathing room in my life. That's an important thing. In fact, if you get nothing else today, just get this one single thing, that breathing room is only available to you if you decide. And the second one, first one's fairly simple, right? It's very straightforward. The second one's a little bit more in depth. It's going to take a little bit of work. Set a breathing room goal. We already established this earlier, but every single one of you, every person within the sound of my voice, every person in my family, we live on a percentage of our income. Why not decide what that percentage is? Right? I mean, decide. For us, what's that breathing room goal? What is that gap between income and spending? Is this 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Do I want it to be 5% today and I want to work toward 20%? Am I going to set a breathing room goal that's reasonable for me to attain in the next couple of months? But decide first and then set a breathing room goal. How much of my income am I going to spend? And how much am I going to set aside so that I have some breathing room, so that I can drive slower, so that I can get along better, so that I can pray and focus, right? So that I can not worry about the things that I eat and the place that I sleep and the clothes that I wear, right? So what is it that you're going to do? What is your breathing room goal? So step one is decide. Step two is set a breathing room goal, one that you can attain fairly quickly. And the third thing, spy on your money for 2 months. For 8 weeks, what I want you to do is write down every single expense. Keep track of where every single penny goes for 2 months. For 2 months, you write down everything. If you stop and get a Coke at the gas station, you write down, I got a Coke at the gas station, here's how much it was. If you spend X number of dollars at the grocery store, write it down. If you spend this much money on Netflix, write it down. If you spend this much money going out to dinner, write it down. For 2 months, this is not a judgment time. This is not time for you to pick or change or do things. Do things just like you do right now. It's not time for you to judge how the other person in your family does it. But for 2 months, write down every single expense. And the end of 2 months, you can look at those things. You'll know where. But here's the deal. You should decide. Set a breathing room goal. And then for 2 months, spy on your money. You should be a knowing where every dollar is a going, right? Just remember that every dollar needs a space on this thing. Just a list, a piece of paper will do, but spy on your money for 2 months. And then once you've got that down, you'll be able to look at it and do this thing. Cut spending. Cutting spending is not fun, right? It doesn't feel fun. But I'll promise you this, if you are able to spy on your money for 2 months, you won't cut where it matters so much. You'll be able to find some things. You go, you know what? If I didn't do this, it would probably be easier. You know, if I made coffee at home, I'd probably be able to get some breathing room. And then when you're comparing spending, when you're trying to cut spending, what you really should do is compare spending. Compare what you're doing currently to what value breathing room would have. Man, I could probably enjoy coffee more if I spent less money on it, right? If I had some breathing room, that coffee would taste better. Right? If I didn't have to pay for this car, that car would feel better to drive. Right? What kind of space do I need to make? What's my breathing room goal? Then I'm going to compare spending to breathing room and cut spending that doesn't have to happen, because that's important for us to do. And the next thing after that is develop a debt retirement plan. Develop a debt retirement plan. Now, I know that one can seem a little bit so I'm going to give you some next steps. It's going to be a little overwhelming, going, how do I get from here to out of debt? How do I declutter my financial closet? I'm going to give you just really a simple step. Go to a bookstore and get a copy of Financial Peace Revisited by Dave Ramsey. Fantastic book, fantastic things. Not all of them do we all agree with, but we love what he has to say, especially about getting out of debt. Now, I know what you're saying. Jeremy, I can't afford to go buy a book right now. It's so strapped, I can't afford to swing it. Okay, I got one for you. Go to a bookstore and pick up Financial Peace Revisited and sit down in one of their chairs and read chapter 8. It starts on page 67, right? Just read that one chapter and then put it back. And you're like, Jeremy, I'm working so much that I can't afford to buy a book and I can't afford to go spend the time doing it. All right, stop by a bookstore on your way home from work And then go to get Financial Peace and turn to pages 90 and 91 and take out the smartphone that you can't afford and take a picture of page 90 and 91. Don't bend any of the pages, put it back on the book, right? But go home and open up your camera and read these 2 pages and then get to work. And when you get out of debt, go back and buy the book. Because I'll promise you this, you're going to want to tell somebody about it. Sheila and I worked through the process of setting up a budget and learning to give ourselves some breathing room and setting up aside a certain stage in our life when we did those things. And it has changed our marriage. You know what we don't do? We don't fight about money. I mean, literally ever. We just don't fight about money. We fight at times about different things in our life, but the number one cause of divorce is arguments or issues related to money. And the reality is that we don't fight about money. So it gives us a much better chance of surviving. So let me ask you this question. What are your next steps forward? So here's what we've done for this series. We've kind of outlined that we're going to do this every week. As we talk about money, as we talk about time, as we talk about relationships, we're going to fill in these 4 blanks. What is it that needs to be added to your life? Maybe it's you need to decide that you're going to choose to move forward, or maybe you need to set a breathing room goal. What is it that needs to be subtracted from your life? Maybe when we talked about cutting spending, you're like, you know what, I could cut some of that, and it would just, even that would just give me a little bit of breathing room. What is it that needs to be increased in your life? What is it that needs to get bigger, greater than it currently is? And what needs to be less than it currently is? What's your add, what's your subtract, what's your greater than and less than? Just when you walk out of today, maybe you fill in 2 of these. Maybe you can fill in all 4. What is it that needs to be added to your life? What is it that needs to be taken away from your life? What needs to be increased and what needs to be decreased? Because there's a reality that creating breathing room financially may lower your standard of living, but it will raise your quality of life. Because here's the deal. When we are so crushed financially, so crowded, so pouring out over the edges, and our income and our spending are tracking right with each other, and we have no breathing room, we can't even enjoy the things we have. And here's why we've invited you to be here today. Because life is better financially with breathing room. So take some steps forward.